This is the 8th in a series of 12 introductory videos for teaching in a digital age. And I'm very grateful to the Commonwealth of Learning for enabling this project, the videos to happen. Now, I talk about assessment and credentialing right throughout the book. I don't really have it as a separate topic because basically assessment should be part of a general strategy. It shouldn't be something that's thought of separately at the end of a course, but it should be integral throughout the thinking and the design of a course. So the aim of these 12 videos is to provide a brief introduction to main themes in the book. The book is free and online from that URL. And this video is specifically about assessment and credentialing. The first thing is that assessment should be absolutely linked to desired learning outcomes in a course. And in a sense, you can almost think of it as backward design. You might even start with trying to define what are the assessment questions you want to ask students, and then what do I need to teach in order for them to be able to get good grades on those assessment questions. And some instructors I know are very successful in using assessment questions as a way of defining the learning outcomes. And it's particularly important here to think, as I mentioned earlier in the book, about how you will assess the skills that you're trying to develop, many of which will be embedded within the content. So how are you going to assess the development of those skills throughout a course? There is a particular approach to assessment in online learning called competency-based learning. I talk about that in chapter 4, section 5. And this is where students are given a set of competencies defined in collaboration with employers and the institution, and they're measured on a competency. But I think I'm talking more about more general skills than those that are fairly narrowly defined as what an employer wants. I'm talking about skills such as critical thinking, communication skills, and so on. So the issue is how you're going to assess those throughout the course. And in particular, skills are developmental. They come in with a certain level of skills. What is the difference that you've made in your teaching when they go out of the course in terms of a skill? And many skills, of course, can't just be taught in one course. They have to be taught throughout a program. But I find it very useful to look at something fairly old here, which is Bloom's taxonomy of learning objectives. And where do your skills come in terms of the following levels of competency in terms of skills development? And I also want to talk about the difference between objective and qualitative assessment. That will depend on your epistemology, and it's not an either-or thing. You might have some objective testing for the basic facts in a subject, a more qualitative assessment for the things higher in this pyramid, such as analyzing, evaluating, and creating. But I think the most important thing of all with your assessment strategy is to be transparent, so students, when they come in, know exactly what you intend to assess in terms of learning outcomes, and certainly making it clear that you're going to assess skills such as communication skills, writing skills, or other communication skills, and consistency in your teaching so that you're always teaching to those skills and content areas that you defined. Now, one of the things that new technology does, it allows you to look at different ways of assessing students. The most important thing about online learning in particular is that it provides a record of student learning activities. You can see what the students are doing, so that if you set for instance, if you set a set of multiple choice questions, you can see what the students have done on that. But more importantly, you can see what their contributions are to discussion forums and project work. Now, quantitative assessment, if you're teaching online now, you can have computer marked assignments. Most learning management systems have an area where you can go in and set your own questions and answers and correct answers and so on. But also qualitative assessment is more difficult online or more difficult generally, but you can track student online activities and particularly how their skills are developing over time and what they're doing to further their skills. And in particular, e-portfolios enable students to catalogue their work. So if you give them activities to do, they can write those up and put them into their e-portfolio, and if they share that with you, you can see what their work is as they progress through a course. And this has important implications for assessment. It allows you to do what I call authentic assessment, project work, either individually or groups. Students can have their own project and work on that project. And that enables you to see how each student is working individually or what they're contributing to group work on a project. So it raises the question then of continuous versus summative assessment. Do you assess the students for the work they do throughout the course, or do you wait till the end of the course and give them one exam or one set of papers or one set of assessments at the end to assess what they've done through the course? And again, it depends on your philosophy of teaching here. Some would say that the true test of what you've taught is what the student can do at the end of the course rather than how they got there. Other instructors might feel that the process of learning is as equally important as the outcomes. So again, that will depend on your philosophy. But online learning certainly makes continuous assessment much more transparent and obvious than it does in face-to-face teaching, where you often can't see what the students are doing outside the classroom. The second thing is embedding skills in a subject area. Projects need to be, when you embed the skills in a subject area, you may be teaching about European 19th century history, but how will you assess those communication and skills or the ability to collaborate with students on a project perhaps? How are you going to assess that, as well as whether they can remember or reproduce the content? And lastly, manage the workload. If you have a lot of students, you may have to break them into groups to cut down on the marking, for instance, and mark groups and award group. One way to do that is to have two marks, one for the group as a whole and one for the individual contributions to the group, for instance. And lastly, I always use a spreadsheet. If I'm working online, I have a spreadsheet within the learning management system to track student work. So I have student activities along the top and the names of the students down the side. And each week I go in and look at what each student has done during that week and give them a grade as part of continuous assessment. Now, one of the questions that always comes up about when people move to online is, well, how do I stop students cheating? Now, this is not just a question specific to online learning. Students will cheat whether they're in face-to-face classes or online. But one way to overcome cheating is using authentic assessment. If a student is doing an individual project, they might crib, if you like, or get somebody to help them, but it's their project. There's less meaning in cheating in your own project, particularly if you set a project that's of interest to the students. I'm thinking of things to do with climate change, for instance, or things in their neighborhood, which makes it much more difficult for them to cheat, and doesn't make sense for them to cheat because it's something they want to do because they want to learn about the subject. It has intrinsic value to them. Secondly, lay out and enforce the rules. students will copy and paste, particularly in online courses. They can go out and find stuff. I don't discourage that so long as they say where they got the information from. They have to make quotes and so on. So I set out the rules regarding plagiarism very clearly, and also what their roles are in a project and how they should be working. Again, transparency, particularly if students are not face-to-face, is really important. Maybe you give marks for group work and discussion. I'm inclined in discussions not to give marks explicitly for, say, the number of comments that students make, because that can be meaningless. It can actually drive bad discussion behavior. I try to make the discussions very relevant to the assignments that they know that, are coming. So they know if they participate actively in that discussion, they're going to be better prepared for the specific assignments. One of the things I like to do in continuous assessment, I like to have a little check on what they know and what they can do at the beginning of the course, and then give a similar kind of assessment at the end, see what kind of progress they made. There are tools out there for stopping cheating online. I'm not absolutely keen on these tools, but some instructors find them very useful. And sometimes just the threat to students that they know such tools are out there and you might use them is often enough to improve their behavior. So there are plagiarism checkers like Turnitin. And they're also, again, you need to think about the exam and how if you're going to have an end of term assessment, how are they going to do that? Now, one way is the whole course can be online, but you may want them to come in to a center, not necessarily the main campus, but a center where they can be supervised doing the exam. You might make agreements, for instance, with local, if you're a university, with local community college campuses, so students can come into their local community if they're not living near the university, for instance. But there are also tools like ProctorU. You see a camera there that records what the student is doing when they're taking an online exam. And also there's software that will check what the student is doing. So if the student comes out of the exam app, it's a special app for doing the exam, it will track that. If they go and look things up, it will track what they do. So and it will flag that on the assessment, on the online assessment. So there are tools out there that can also help stop cheating online. But basically, cheating is a problem whether you're teaching online or face-to-face. And although the issues are slightly different for online learning, they're no better nor no worse than cheating face-to-face. Then there's authentication and credentialing. What many institutions in Canada do now is students often take the same exams as the on-campus students. And certainly the courses are considered of equal quality, whether they're done face-to-face or online by the institution. So there's no differentiation on the student transcript, on their degree transcript, as to whether programs were taken online or face-to-face. And that's particularly important for some employers who still have maybe an out-of-date view that online teaching isn't as effective as face-to-face teaching. Basically, you should have the same quality assurance measures as for on-campus teaching. On the right, you'll see a quality assurance process from a college in Canada, Algonquin College, which applies both to their online and to their face-to-face courses. Now, every course has its own specific requirements for quality assurance. So in science, for instance, you need to know how the lab work's going to be done. You just apply the same kind of thinking to a course if it's been delivered online. There are certain things you need to do for quality assurance online, and I have a separate video about that. But basically, the same approval process for curricula, for mode of delivery, for set readings and so on, should be applied to online as it is to face-to-face teaching. In most developed countries, the institutions themselves, once they're established and got a reputation and confidence from the government, they determine their own quality assurance and the validity of the assessment. Although some institutions also have external evaluators come in to make sure that the grading is consistent with other institutions. But again, online or blended is just a difference in delivery mode. All these quality assurance processes that you have in face-to-face teaching, in most cases, work just as well for online learning. With the increase in lifelong learning, with adults coming back wanting more qualifications, there's been a demand for new kinds of credentials. What students need then is some kind of recognition if they've added value to their bachelor's or master's program, if they've done extra courses since they graduated. And also other students may not want to do a full degree, but they may do eventually. So they would like any short-term qualifications that they've got to build a bridge towards a regular degree. They would count towards a regular degree, so they don't have to do that kind of course all over again. So more and more lifelong learners are looking for transportable, mutually recognized qualifications. And there are various ways that this is being done, called microcredentials, a badge for maybe a specific module of work. You may do a 1-month course, say, on project management for business, and you get a badge for that. But if you did, say, 3 or 4 of those badges, they might build up to a certificate. And if you do several certificates, they might build up to a diploma. And if you get a couple of diplomas, that might add up to a degree. So these micro-credentials need to be stackable and lead eventually to full qualifications. And the important thing here is to get some kind of standardization between the institutions about what a badge or a certificate means, so that they're transportable, that if you do 3 or 4 badges in one institution, but they have some courses that you want in another institution, you can count the ones you've done when you move to the new institutions. And particularly the professional associations now are looking more and more towards the universities and colleges to help with this credentialing. And you'll see on the bottom image some 2 lawyers, and that's from a program at a university in Canada, where an institution runs a program on the business of law, how law practices actually operate as distinct from a law degree, to prepare students who've got a law degree for working in a business. So they get a diploma for that. And that's been worked out with the Bar Association of Upper Canada. So it's a collaboration again between a university and a professional association. And these kind of recognized professional micro-credentials are going to become increasingly important. So in conclusion, we need a greater focus on assessment of intellectual skills, being very specific about how you measure things like critical thinking, for instance. Technology allows for new methods of assessment, better tracking of student work. Skills assessment requires authentic assessment methods. The skills must be embedded in a particular environment that's relevant and realistic, not only to the student, but to employers who might be interested in students with those skills. Cheating is an issue with all teaching. There are special measures you can take for online learning. There's no reason at all why the assessment of online learning shouldn't be just as rigorous as the assessment if it's done face-to-face. And lastly, lifelong learning is demanding new forms of qualifications, more flexible means of qualifying students who go on learning after they've left university or haven't been to university but want to build up ways of getting into a university. So you can get more information on these topics from my book, which you can download from here. And lastly, the next video will be about quality teaching and quality standards.